You're listening to Refracted World with Terry Geo. Episode 2, The Youngest Director in Television. At 17 years old, I was the principal writer and director for a light entertainment show on ITV, which pulled in an average of 1.2 million viewers. Saying this out loud now seems ridiculous. How could a teenager, not long out of school, with no qualifications, be leading a successful show? Let's start at the beginning. My beginning. I was born in a small village called Hollingwood in Chesterfield, not to be confused with Hollywood, although that is where I always wished to be. My earliest memories of that place are sparse due to my brain not being fully developed yet, but I have been told I was a terror as a child. Drawing on walls, breaking everything in sight, screaming at the top of my lungs, and escaping my home at 6 o'clock in the morning by using a stool from the dining area, dragging it over to the kitchen sink, climbing up said sink, out of the kitchen window, onto the rabbit hutch, over the fence, and running to the next door but one's house, banging on their door for tea and toast. I was 3 years old. If I were born now, I would no doubt be diagnosed with ADHD or autism, but back then I was just a bad child. The one thing that always worked to calm me down was film. I loved staring at the old CRT screen, and spaceships and animated creatures and singing puppets would entertain me. The first film I ever saw at the cinema was Disney's Fox and the Hound. I still own the pillowcase, but I don't remember seeing that movie. The first film I ever remember seeing at the cinema was The Never-Ending Story. Apart from not being able to sleep that night as visions of the Gamork invaded my thoughts, that film was to have a profound effect on my young mind. I tell people I have been a writer since first putting crayon to paper, and The Never-Ending Story was the catalyst for that act. I wrote about the film from scene to scene, drawing the characters and eventually writing new adventures for those characters. I can still visualize some of the pages, although I unfortunately didn't have parents who scrapbooked anything, and so all have been lost to time. My brother was born when I was 4 years old, and soon after we moved to Yorkshire for my father's work in the police force. As I was so young, the move didn't really affect me at all. I soon made new friends in this new county, and as I only recently started school, I didn't really miss any education, thankfully. I found out years later that on the very day we moved to Yorkshire, halfway around the world, my future husband was born. Throughout my school years, although quite difficult at times, more on that in another episode, my writing flourished. I won writing competitions, and at just 11 years old, I adapted one of my stories into a play, which I cast, directed, and performed in front of the school. At high school, I was cast in lead roles in the school plays, continued to grow as a writer, and auditioned for many TV shows, but unfortunately, I was never the chosen one. I was bullied a lot throughout school, almost every single day, and the thought of going to college with the same people who had bullied me in a system that was not aimed to protect me at that time, thanks to Section 28, I was thankful that a job offer came through from a local TV company whilst I was taking my mock exams. They were looking for school leavers to apply for a job as a runner. At the time, I didn't even know what a runner was, but I knew I wanted to work in entertainment, and so applied. Thankfully, I was the chosen one. This is before minimum wage existed in the UK, and so I was earning £30 a week while working sometimes 7 days and up to 12 hours a day. But I didn't care. I loved what I was doing. As I had a thick Yorkshire accent, which was frowned upon at the BBC at the time, I was taught to speak properly, adapting a more RP speech, which was more acceptable when answering the phones. This is why my accent now is a little muddled. The first show I worked on was called Year of the Peer, a BBC Two show about 6 peers in the UK. It may sound boring, but when you're working in TV as a 16-year-old, everything is exciting. The production was spread over 2 weeks. The first week was the research, and the second week was the actual filming. And so myself and Michelle, who was the segment producer at the time, we went out in a car and went to all 6 piers all around the country, which took us a week. got back to the office, and then did it all again with the film crew. The 6 piers were, let me see if I can remember this, Blackpool, Weston-super-Mare, Bournemouth, Brighton, Southend, and Cromer. Wow, I remembered them all. And so that's all of the country, really. That's all of England. And you have to remember, this is before the internet and before GPS. So I was in the car with this huge map and printouts of all the directions of how to get where we needed to be. And I was 16. I was literally a week or 2 weeks out of school when we went on this research trip. And I just remember feeling really overwhelmed, having to direct Michelle as she drove. And then as we went to meet these tourist representatives and try to find the right shots and where to film and where to set up the camera and where to stay. And it was a lot. It was a lot as a first job. But it was fun because we were traveling around, and I knew that when we'd finish this research trip, we'd then be with the film crew, and I'd be actually behind the camera as they filmed something for television. It was thrilling, even though I know 6 piers does sound quite boring, but no, it was really good. And the week of the actual filming, Alex Hall was the presenter. She was a radio presenter at the time and then did some things for TV, and she was lovely. And on the actual piers, we'd be speaking to somebody who ran the pier or worked on the pier. In Blackpool, we spoke to Linda Nolan, and that was, oh wow, Linda Nolan. And it was really good fun. And there was one bit where I think we were in Weston-super-Mare or Southend, one of those, I can't remember. And the woman we'd met the week before, she was the tourist representative, and she was really lovely. And she gave her interview on the pier. I remember it, bright sunny day. And afterwards, I went up to her and going, "You're going to look brilliant on telly," in my thick Yorkshire accent. And ever since then, my boss at the time, who's now my friend Paul Stead, he still takes the mickey out of me for it. But I don't care. It was just me being a 16-year-old. Most of my job, though, was in the actual office, and it wasn't a big team. This is an independent television company that comes up with ideas and then gets commissioned by the television networks. Remember, again, this is before we had Netflix or streaming services. And so the TV channels were at the time BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, Channel 4. I don't think, did we have Channel 5? Maybe, I can't remember. But we made things primarily for BBC Two and ITV. And we'd be coming up with ideas and then, getting them commissioned. The next show we worked on, I think, was Florida Folk. And that was similar to Year of the Pier, except it was speaking to expats in Florida. The reason I say similar is because we had to do a recce before the actual shoot. And for that one, I went to Florida with Paul Stead, the boss. And we flew over, I think it was February half term, because we couldn't get a direct flight. So we had to fly to Chicago first and then down to Florida. And I'd only ever flown once in my life before that. And that was when I was 9 years old and we'd flown to Mallorca. And that's the only time I'd ever flown. And now I'm doing transatlantic flight to Chicago as it's snowing and then down to Florida. And it was a rocky flight. My goodness, it was rocky. We flew with American Airlines, I remember. They were really lovely, though. And in Florida, we did the same as what we'd done for Year of the Pier. We travelled all around Florida within a week, and we spoke to all the people who were going to be on the TV. And I remember meeting some lovely expats. And we had incredible food, stayed in the best hotels. And I say we stayed in the best hotels. I remember once we didn't. We'd left it too late, and we had to go to a roadside hotel. And it was one of these $30 a night drive, we just off the highway. And we'd got into the room and there were cockroaches all over the room. And I went and complained. And they said, "Oh, we're not just going to give you new rooms all night." And there was a long queue behind me. I said, "Well, if your rooms didn't have cockroaches, I wouldn't have to complain." Anyway, yeah, so we'd stayed in this awful hotel that time. But usually we stayed in nice hotels. And I remember we were in Fort Lauderdale with these very rich people who bought a home over there and were working there. And I'd never had Chinese food before. And it was in this really big Chinese restaurant with the table that turns around. And I just remember having a taste sensation with all these amazing flavors that I didn't even know existed. Umami. It was brilliant. And for the actual filming, I didn't go because underneath all of this, we had more than one TV show running at the same time. Underneath all this, we did a light entertainment show called What's On. It was just a short 5-minute piece that went after the news on Yorkshire television. And it was once a week to inform the viewers of what was on in the region that coming week or the coming month. And we'd had the contract for a long time, a good few months at this point, but it was a hard show to do because you had to collate all the information of all the events that were happening in the region, pick out the best ones, write the script, find a location, and then get the presenter to deliver all the lines at that location. It was a lot of work, and because it was such a short show, it didn't give us a lot of money. So it was a lot of work for not a lot of return, but we did it because, we needed to get more programs out there, and we're only a small company. And it was fun to work on. And when Florida Folk was being filmed, I got made producer of What's On. The first thing I ever directed was actually in December 1996. And at the time we were doing 2 shows, one called Time Off With Gloria Hunniford, which was Gloria speaking to friends of hers who were really famous. That was a great show. And the other one was What's On at the same time. And so What's On's meant to be for the Yorkshire region, but we like to push it sometimes. We'd already said, it's so great living in our region. We can hop on a boat and go to Amsterdam, which of course you could go anywhere really, but we got a free trip to Amsterdam and did a whole show there, which was interesting. I kind of messed up on that one. I wasn't going to mention this, but so bearing in mind, I'd only just been made producer in the past month, I suppose, and we get there, it's November, it's freezing, and I'd done all the booking. So I'd booked the ferry crossing, and we'd all gone over there on the Saturday morning, and everyone had work on the Monday morning, obviously. And I said, there's a boat at 8:30. They told me there was a boat at 8:30. And so so I presumed on the Sunday night, but it wasn't until we're on the boat and we're sitting with the guy who worked for the ferry company, and Paul had said, I didn't know you did night ferry crossings back. He said, no, we don't. He said, but we're on a boat at 8:30 on Sunday night. And the guy said, no, you're not. That's 8:30 Monday morning. And it's something like, I think it's Hull to Zeebrugge, and I think it's about 13 hours. And everyone's like, no. So a lot of people had to fly back, and I was not looked on favourable that trip. But hey, again, I was 17 at the time. So after that, we also pushed the boat out and said, it's so great living in our region. We can just hop on a train and do Christmas shopping in London. So we did. We did an entire episode in London. We actually got permission to film in Hamley's toy shop. And we actually spoke to the cast of Les Miserables and got tickets to see the show. And that was the first time I saw it. I've actually seen it, I think, 11 times live. It's my favourite musical of all time now. And it was a great trip. But while we were there, we were also filming Time Off with Gloria Hunniford and Cilla Black. And so Paul went to film that section and said to me, could you go and direct the section we were doing with E17, who were a pop group in the 90s? And so we went over to Ealing Studios and met Brian Harvey, who was the lead singer of E17. And I got to direct that segment, and it went really well. And so I'm really grateful that they actually gave me the opportunity after messing up Amsterdam, but they did. And that was in December 96, 97, 96. Oh, time, honestly. It was December 96. And then from January 97, I was the full-time director of What's On. And so for the entire year, I directed every single show. And because we only had a small amount of budget for the show, because I think we made £1,200 per show, and the cameraman sound cost 600. So half the budget went to them. The presenter, who was Carolyn Hodgson, was part of the Yorkshire TV crew, so I don't think we paid her a lot because she was also paid from Yorkshire TV. I can't remember now, it's a very long time ago. But basically, we didn't get a lot of money, and thankfully I was very cheap, because even when I was directing TV, I was only earning £100 a week. Still living with my family, obviously. But it was great fun. I mean, I was getting up sometimes at 5:30 in the morning so we could go on these shoots, because to try and make more money, we filmed 2 in a day. So we'd go to Fountains Abbey, and then we go to a museum down the road, and then we got 2 programs for the price of 1, if you like, just to make some more money out of it. But there were long days, and they were very fun. And Carolyn Hodgson, who was the presenter, was so great to work with. She was just really great. So there was me, the director. Then we had Rob, who was my producer, Carolyn, presenter, and then we had the cameraman and soundman. The soundman was called Harry, but I cannot remember the cameraman's name. But yeah, we'd all meet up, and we'd all make these shows, and then they'd go out. And before I took over directing, the program got about 500,000 viewers. After I took over, it was getting like 1.2 million. And I think it's because I put a young spin on it. As just a 17-year-old, I put a lot of modern music in there and made it a lot more fresh. And so the viewing age was usually, after the news, it's quite usually an older range of people who would watch it. But when I took over, younger people started watching it. And so we got more viewers. And it was great. You know, I'm directing TV at 17 years old. Who cares if I'm only on £100 a week? It didn't matter. I was doing something I really loved and I was good at. In between doing What's On, we also did other programs like Menus and Music, which paired music from a certain country. And Brian Turner was the chef who was on the show for that. This was in early 1996, so way before I took over as director of What's On. It came straight after Florida Folk, actually. And I hated that job so much. And the director was evil. He was just truly horrible. He once screamed at me for half an hour in front of the entire crew and the presenter because I'd bought the wrong crisps. So I was sent out to buy everyone lunch. I'd gone to a local sandwich shop, and the only crisps they had there were hula hoops. And I brought them back, and he screamed at me saying, "These are not crisps, how dare you bring these?" And just made me feel so small. And I always swore if I ever became a director, I would never be like him. And I never was. There was another show I worked on as well called Ladies of the House, which was about female MPs in the House of Commons. And I got to meet some great MPs, including Glenda Jackson, who used to be an actor. She died this year, actually, and she was great. I really, really liked her. She was lovely. Another show we worked on was called Medical Matters, and that was with Claire Rayner, talking about medical procedures and how they all work. I think it was the original title for that was The A to Z of Medicine, but we changed it to Medical Matters. And I had to go through all the rushes. Now, the rushes are everything that are recorded in one day. And as this is back before digital, this was all done on tapes, made by Betamax, actually. So I would sit in the office and go through all the time codes. So at the bottom of the screen, there's a code which tells you the seconds and minutes and hours of filming. And I would mark down on a piece of paper what happened with each cut. So if they moved to a doctor speaking, I would write down the actual time and then what the doctor's saying and transcribe as much as I can. So then when it went to the editing suite, they knew where to look on each tape. And I saw a lot of different surgeries, including a tumor being taken out of someone's brain, which was weird to watch. And I had to watch it all to get all the time coding. None of it went on TV. It was all either blurred out or, or cut at the different moments. But I had to watch it all. And I wasn't disgusted by it. I found it really interesting to see how they cut open the top of the head and took out the tumor. Another show I worked on was Where's the Jack, which was with Jules Carling, who was Will Carling's wife. He used to be a rugby player, I believe. And then, of course, Time Off With, which was with Gloria Hunniford, which I will talk about more in a later episode. But that was really good for me to work on and for the people I met on that show. But yeah, in 97, my entire world was What's On. And it was an incredible experience for a 17-year-old to go through. But I wasn't taken seriously by a lot of people. We would turn up at the shoots and they would see me and they would see everyone else who was older than me. And even though they'd been talking to me on the phone or, well, just the phone, I was going to say the internet, but the internet didn't exist back then. They would not go to me. They would think I was the runner or, the researcher or something. But no, I was the one directing it. And I used to have this bright blue puffer jacket that I'd been given by a modelling agency in Leeds. We'd done some work with them. I can't remember the name of the modelling agency now, but I wore it all the time and it was so bright and so bold, but it was great. I mean, especially in Yorkshire in winter when it's freezing, it was a really nice warm jacket, but I really stuck out. But yeah, the show was great and it was fun to do. And I got to put a lot of quirky things in there. So whereas the program before was very much, hello, welcome to What's On, and in your local area this week, blah, blah, blah. I didn't do that. We'd go to a swimming pool and I'd do a Baywatch opening with the Baywatch sound and all the cuts and Carolyn's name going across the screen. We went to a police and prison museum and they had a blue telephone box outside. So, of course, I had to do a Doctor Who rip-off. And I kept doing things like this and it just made it more fun. And I'd be always putting in all the music that I loved. So we'd go to a National Trust property and there'd be Kylie Minogue playing in the background, or Candy Girls, or Michael Jackson, or whatever. And because I worked in TV, I got free everything. So free VHS, free CDs, free concert tickets. I was going everywhere all the time. So when I wasn't working, I was at a concert or I was meeting somebody. There was one time I got tickets to go and see Prisoner Cell Block H, the musical, with Lily Savage. And because once I got tickets, it wasn't just you get tickets to see it, you get tickets to also go to the after show afterwards. And so I don't tell this story very often. So I went backstage. Bearing in mind, remember, I'm only 17 years old. And I'd gone with a friend of mine who was driving because I didn't drive. I still don't, actually. And we'd seen the show. It was great fun. Lily Savage. If you don't know who Lily Savage is or was, she was a drag queen played by Paul O'Grady, who in later years became a TV presenter. He died recently as well. And yeah, so we'd gone backstage and all the cast were there drinking, and then a few from the press. And then there was me, this very bouncy and loud northerner. And I saw Linda Nolan in the corner drinking wine. And if you remember, I'd met her before on Year of the Pier. And I bounded over. It'd been a year since I'd met her. I didn't even know she'd remember. And I'd probably had a sniff of wine at the time, so I was pretty drunk. And I went over and went, Linda! And spilt my entire glass of wine all down her. Oh, she laughed it off and said, oh, don't worry about it. But I always wonder if she just badmouthed me afterwards. Probably not. I mean, she was really nice, but those moments in your life when you just feel like that pang of regret, and yeah, that's one of those moments in my life. And Lily Savage, Paul O'Grady, was actually out walking his dogs after the show, and then he came. Bella Emberg was in that show as well, and you may not know who she is, but she used to be in a show called Russ Abbott's something or other, and I knew who she was, and so I started chatting to her, and we were both drinking, we're both laughing, and eventually I said, oh, do you know where Paul is? She went, oh, darling, I thought you were with him. Paul comes in with his two dogs, comes straight over to me and Bella, and then Bella introduces me, we hug, and then we chat for quite a while, and he was such a nice guy, really lovely guy, and I have never heard anybody say any different about Paul O'Grady. He was great. And that was just one of the perks of working in television back then. And even though I didn't get a lot of money, I did get a lot of amazing experiences. So while I'm living my best life and spilling drinks over celebrities, at the same time, the company were making a show called The Julie Goodyear Show. Julie Goodyear used to play Bette Lynch in Coronation Street for many, many years. And when she left the show, we were the first company to get her to make a TV show. And we called it The Julie Goodyear Show. And it was about Julie going around to different people in the UK who were extraordinary and talking about them and their lives. And I won't say too much about this, but most of it is still online because the story was sold to the papers by our company because she was such a horror to work with. For me, I've met a lot of celebrities throughout my life, and most are nice, some are extraordinarily lovely, and some are just pure horrors to work with. And unfortunately, Julie was one of those people. I didn't directly work on the show, but I did speak to Julie quite a number of times when she called up the office to complain. And I heard a lot of the stories from the producer and the director. And she was just horrible, not just to the people who worked on the show, but anybody who went up to her in that time. She just thought she was better than she is because the BBC, when seeing the programme, refused to air it because it was that bad. And that completely crushed our company. We'd spent so much. This was meant to be our breakout show, and because it was never aired, we didn't get our money, and so it completely wiped us out. And in the summer of 1997, the company closed down. It was gone. But we still had one program that we had to make, that we were making, and that was successful, and that was mine. It was What's On. And so all the staff were let go except for me, Michelle, and Paul. And we carried on under a different name for a different company, trying to get more work in 6 months. But when that didn't work out, the company then merged with another company in Leeds. But in about November of 97, I'd made a lot of contacts in the BBC, and they knew that I wanted to do everything in my life. And I loved singing, I loved acting, and I really wanted to be in a boy band. I was obsessed with boy bands at the time. I'd seen so many concerts. And a friend of mine who worked in children's acquisitions at BBC called me up to tell me that there was a new boy band that had just formed, and one of the members had dropped out, and they were looking for a fourth member, and said I should apply for an audition. So I went down to London that weekend to be auditioned, and I was given the job that day. Took the contract home, and then that was it. I was signed up to be in a boy band. I continued working in television until the end of the year. I did the Christmas show for What's On when the contract ended, and then I joined a boy band. But that's another story.